Hello, and welcome to another mystery tale. In the heart of upstate New York, where fog shrouds ancient pines and silence whispers secrets, lies a monastery untouched by time, and a truth buried deeper than the roots of the forest. This is The Whisper in the Pine Forest. Chapter 1: The Whisper in the Pine Forest. Mist cloaked the hills of upstate New York like a funeral shroud, drifting through the towering pine trees that guarded the edges of St. Benedict Monastery. It was late October 2025, and the air carried a sharp bite, the last vestiges of fall dying into winter's chill. The monastery, a hulking relic of gray stone from the 19th century, stood as a beacon of quietude and reflection for weary city dwellers seeking solace in the retreat programs it offered. But tonight, something about the forest felt wrong. Detective Sarah Collins tightened her grip on the steering wheel of her patrol SUV. Her knuckles turned white against the worn black leather. Beside her sat Rex, her golden retriever canine partner, ears perked and muscles taut, his amber eyes locked on the monastery's looming iron gates barely visible through the fog. A single bark had echoed moments ago, sharp, lonely, and out of place. The crackle of the police radio sliced through the eerie silence. "Sarah, we've got another call from the Carters. Emily hasn't checked in for 3 days. They're frantic." Sarah exhaled, a cloud of condensation forming on the inside of the windshield. Emily Carter, 20 years old, a psychology student at NYU, had signed up for a week-long spiritual retreat at St. Benedict. Her mother had said she was trying to find herself again. Under normal circumstances, Emily called home daily. Now, with 4 days of total silence, her parents were spiraling into full-blown panic. She glanced at Rex. His tail swished once, anxious. "What do you think, partner?" she murmured. Rex let out a low, uneasy whine, eyes still fixed ahead. He didn't like it either. Sarah had served with the Pine Hollow Police Department for over a decade. She'd learned to trust her gut, and Rex's instincts even more. St. Benedict Monastery had always enjoyed a spotless reputation. The monks were respected for their wisdom, kindness, and peaceful way of life. But Sarah couldn't shake the gnawing unease twisting in her gut. 2 other young women had gone missing from this very retreat over the past 5 years. Both cases remained unsolved. Not this time, she told herself. She owed that much to the families still waiting for answers. The crunch of tires on gravel echoed as her vehicle pulled up to the monastery gate. Fog swirled under the headlights. 2 young monks in brown robes stepped forward, lanterns in hand. Their faces were pale and expressionless in the golden light. "Peace be with you," one of them greeted softly, though his eyes flicked warily to Rex. "How can we assist you?" Sarah rolled down her window and held up her badge. "Detective Sarah Collins, Pine Hollow PD. I'm here to ask about Emily Carter. She hasn't contacted her family in several days. I need to speak with whoever's in charge." The monks exchanged a fleeting glance, too fast for most to notice, but Sarah caught it. "Father Michael, our abbot, is in prayer," the older monk said, voice calm but hesitant. "But you're welcome to wait in the guest house." Sarah nodded curtly and stepped out of the car, motioning for Rex to follow. His hackles bristled as they passed through the open gates. The air inside felt thicker, heavier than the mist outside, almost suffocating. The guest house was simple and austere, polished dark wood floors, a single oak table and a crucifix on the far wall. A faint scent of frankincense lingered in the air. Sarah declined the offered tea and took a seat, notebook already open. Rex paced the room restlessly, sniffing corners and pausing near the closed door. Moments later, Father Michael entered. He was tall and thin, maybe in his early 50s, with silver-streaked hair and deep-set lines carved into his long face. His smile was warm, but it didn't quite reach his pale blue eyes. "Detective Collins," he said with a slight bow. "Welcome. What brings you to our humble sanctuary?" "Emily Carter," Sarah said, getting straight to the point. "She's been out of contact with her family for 3 days. That's highly unusual for her. I need to see where she was staying and speak with anyone who interacted with her." Father Michael's expression softened, but Sarah noticed the subtle clench in his jaw. "A tragedy," he murmured, shaking his head. "Emily's was a bright and thoughtful young woman. I can't imagine why she would leave without telling anyone. Perhaps she needed time to reflect alone." His voice was gentle, rehearsed. It sounded like a eulogy. Sarah's jaw tightened. "With all due respect, people don't vanish without reason. I'd like to see her room. Now." The abbot hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Of course, this way." They crossed the misty courtyard. Statues of saints loomed out of the fog like forgotten sentinels. Rex sniffed the air, his steps growing more deliberate as they approached the dormitory wing. Emily's room was sparse, just a single bed, a wooden desk, and a small window overlooking the pines. A Bible lay open on the desk, marked with a red ribbon. The sheets on the bed were perfectly tucked, the pillow unwrinkled. Too perfect, Sarah thought, as if arranged for display. But Rex wasn't fooled. The retriever paced the room twice, nose twitching, before stopping beside a neatly stacked pile of brown robes in the corner. With a sharp bark, he pawed one of them, claws catching on the fabric. Sarah knelt beside him and flicked on her flashlight. There, on the collar, was a faint reddish-brown stain. Barely visible but unmistakable. "What is this, Father?" she asked, pointing. Father Michael peered at the robe. His expression didn't flicker. "Perhaps a kitchen accident. We work in the gardens often. Scrapes and cuts happen." Sarah narrowed her eyes. She pulled a rapid blood test kit from her utility belt, dabbed it against the stain, and watched as the chemical turned deep crimson. "It's human blood," she said coldly. The room went still. Rex gave a low growl, the sound vibrating in the silence. Father Michael's smile faded. "I assure you, Detective, there is no violence in this place. Surely it's a misunderstanding." Sarah didn't let him finish. "That robe is now evidence. I'll also need to speak with every monk who was present during Emily's stay. Rex, stay alert." The dog let out another growl of agreement. Outside, the wind whistled through the trees like a distant whisper. Something was wrong here, and Sarah Collins had just begun to uncover it. Chapter 2: A Stain of Suspicion. The guest house fell behind them as Detective Sarah Collins followed Father Michael through the monastery's interior. The hallways were narrow and dim, the air cool and slightly perfumed with incense, but there was a dryness in her mouth that had nothing to do with the climate. She walked in silence, heels clicking softly on polished stone, her senses sharpened by the uncanny stillness that seemed to seep from the monastery's very walls. Rex, her loyal canine partner, moved just ahead, tail low and ears alert, occasionally sniffing at door frames or pausing to glance back at her with a look that mirrored her own unease. Father Michael moved with deliberate calm, hands folded beneath his robe, his long strides unhurried as though he were giving a tour instead of escorting an investigator into the heart of a potentially sinister disappearance. They turned into a modest dining hall, lit by soft overhead fixtures that cast long shadows on the ancient wood of the high-beamed ceiling. A dozen monks sat at a long table, most of them clad in identical brown robes, their heads bowed in quiet conversation or contemplation. The air smelled of fresh bread and boiled herbs, yet the moment Sarah stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Spoons paused midair, words died on lips, and several pairs of eyes flicked toward her, then back down. The room had the peculiar tension of a stage just before a secret was revealed. Father Michael's voice broke the quiet. "These are the residents currently staying within the monastery," he said calmly. "They have all been here during Miss Carter's retreat." Sarah nodded but kept her expression neutral. "I'll need to speak with them, each one, privately if possible." She glanced at Rex, whose nose was already lifting, his posture tightening with a low, almost inaudible growl vibrating from deep within his chest. As she walked slowly along the side of the table, her eyes scanned the faces of the monks, gauging body language, the twitch of a finger, the turn of a head. Most of them kept their gazes down, composed, indifferent even, but one stood out. A skinny novice at the far end, maybe early 20s, shifting uncomfortably in his seat and wringing his hands under the table. His lips were pressed so tightly together they had gone pale. Rex halted directly in front of him, then growled more audibly. The novice jerked slightly. "You," Sarah said without breaking stride, stopping a few feet from him. "Name?" "Brother Thomas," he murmured, eyes still downcast. "Brother Thomas," she repeated. "When was the last time you saw Emily Carter?" He blinked rapidly, his voice faltering. I don't know. I didn't really speak to her. She was quiet, kept to herself. I think, maybe during evening prayer? I'm not sure." Rex growled again, louder this time, drawing the attention of the other monks. Sarah didn't need to say more. She simply turned to one of the officers near the entrance and gestured with her head. "Take him aside. We'll speak again, more thoroughly." As Brother Thomas was escorted from the room, his steps hesitant and unsure, Sarah turned back to the group. Did anyone notice anything unusual about Emily's behavior before she disappeared? Anything at all? The murmured answers that followed were a collage of vague impressions and uncertain timelines. She had seemed contemplative, quiet, and isolated, but no one had seen her leave the monastery, and no one could confirm her whereabouts after her third day. It was as though she had evaporated into the mist. Sarah's frustration simmered just beneath the surface as she made her way back through the corridor toward Emily's room, this time accompanied only by Rex. Something about the spotless bed and carefully arranged Bible had unsettled her earlier, and now, with her suspicions mounting, she felt the need to scrutinize every inch of the space. The blood-stained robe had already been collected for analysis, but she needed more. Rex began to sniff intently around the room, his head darting side to side as he worked in focused silence. Within minutes, he stopped abruptly beside a plain wooden dresser and began pawing at the baseboard, whining low in his throat. Sarah dropped to her knees and examined the spot. The floorboard gave slightly beneath her fingers. She pulled a pocketknife from her belt and pried it upward, revealing a shallow hollow carved into the floor. Inside the small cavity lay a cloth-wrapped bundle. She unwrapped it carefully to find Emily's phone. Powered off, a weathered leather-bound journal, a silver necklace with a broken clasp, and, smeared faintly along the cloth, another reddish-brown stain. Her chest tightened as she opened the journal, flipping through the earlier pages filled with meditations and observations typical of a retreat attendee. But near the end, the handwriting changed. The lines were jagged, hurried. "Something isn't right. I hear noises at night. I don't feel safe. Someone's watching me. Thomas, maybe. If this book is found, I didn't leave on my own." Sarah stood up slowly, her pulse quickening. She stuffed the journal and phone into an evidence bag, then turned back toward the hallway. 10 minutes later, she was standing across from Brother Thomas in a converted storage room now doubling as an interview space. He sat on a narrow wooden bench, his hands folded tightly in his lap, shoulders tense, eyes darting between her and the door as though considering an escape that wasn't there. She tossed the journal onto the table between them. It landed with a soft thud that sounded much louder in the stillness. Thomas stared at it. "Recognize it?" Sarah asked. He said nothing at first, then shook his head. Should I?" It was hidden beneath her floorboards, along with her phone. There's blood on the cloth. You're mentioned by name. I didn't hurt her, he said too quickly, his voice rising. I only talked to her once. She wanted a quiet place. I told her about the garden near the old well. That's it. You told a scared, isolated young woman to go somewhere remote, and then she disappears, Sarah said, her voice cool and sharp. That doesn't look good, Brother Thomas. His face turned ashen. I didn't mean any harm. I thought she wanted to be alone. And now she is. She stood and motioned to the officer outside. Don't let him leave. And don't let him talk to anyone else. With Rex once again leading the way, Sarah stepped out into the deepening fog that now clung to the monastery grounds like a second skin. The trail to the garden was uneven and slightly overgrown, winding past stone archways and long-abandoned storage buildings. It was easy to see how someone could go missing here. They reached the clearing near the old well, a crumbling stone structure half-choked with ivy and moss, its wooden cover sagging in the middle. Rex hesitated at the edge, then began to growl. Sarah approached the well and lifted the wooden cover with effort. The smell was immediate and revolting, a mix of mildew and rot. She shone her flashlight down. Resting on the muddy bottom was a fragment of brown cloth, and the faint suggestion of something else. Something heavier. She exhaled slowly and stepped back. They were no longer looking for a missing person. They were standing at the edge of something far worse. Chapter 3: The trail grows darker. The morning fog had thinned only slightly by the time Sarah returned to the monastery grounds, her boots crunching softly on the damp gravel as she made her way back toward the main courtyard. The silence, though natural to the setting, had taken on a more oppressive quality since the previous night's discovery. The well's foul odor still haunted her senses, and though forensics had yet to extract the cloth fragment from its muddy depths, her gut already told her what the lab results would confirm. Emily had been there. She had been scared, she had been hidden, and someone had known. That someone was likely among the 12 monks she had seen the day before, seated so serenely at their communal table, dressed identically, their expressions cloaked in the calm neutrality of faith. But one of them, or perhaps more, was lying. And Rex, trotting silently beside her with ears forward and tail straight, seemed to feel it too. Inside the monastery, the dining hall had been cleared for interviews. Sarah had arranged for the monks to be questioned individually, isolated from one another to reduce the chance of rehearsed stories or mutual influence. It was a slow, meticulous process, but it was necessary. The first few interviews yielded nothing of substance, vague recollections of Emily praying alone, sitting quietly in the chapel, occasionally walking the outer gardens. No one admitted to seeing her distressed. No one noticed when she stopped showing up for meals. No one asked. And that indifference, Sarah noted, might be just as damning as any physical evidence. It wasn't until Brother Thomas was brought back in, seated again across from her beneath the humming fluorescence of the makeshift interview room, that things began to shift. He looked tired now, shadows beneath his eyes, hands clenched tightly in his lap. When she entered, he flinched slightly, as if bracing for some unseen blow. Sarah took her time, setting her notepad down, clicking her pen once, then again. She didn't need to rush. The silence, heavy and deliberate, was its own form of interrogation. "Brother Thomas," she began, her voice calm but edged with steel. "You told me you spoke to Emily once, directed her to the garden near the old well. Do you remember anything else about that conversation?" He hesitated, licked his lips, then shook his head. "She asked if there was somewhere quiet. I thought it might help her." "Help her?" Sarah repeated. She looked troubled, he admitted, but she didn't want to talk about it. She just nodded and walked away. Sarah studied his face. The way he couldn't meet her eyes. the way his shoulders curled inward, as if he were trying to make himself smaller. "And what happened after? Did you see her again?" "No," he said too quickly. Then softer, "Not after that." "You're certain?" He nodded, but the motion lacked conviction. Rex, lying at her feet, let out a quiet growl. Sarah leaned back, letting the silence stretch. When Thomas finally glanced up, she struck. "Your name is in her journal," she said. "She wrote that she was afraid, that she didn't trust you." His breath caught audibly. I never," he began, then stopped himself, wringing his hands harder. "I didn't mean to scare her." "But you did," Sarah said. "And now she's missing. And we've found blood. A scrap of cloth. Evidence that she may have been injured, or worse." Thomas looked as though he might be sick. His lips trembled. "I didn't hurt her," he whispered. "I swear. I panicked. She saw me. I thought she'd tell." "Tell what?" He froze. Sarah didn't blink. What was she going to tell Brother Thomas? His voice cracked. "I took something. From the donation box. Just a few bills. I was going to put it back, but she saw me. She said she'd go to Father Michael." Sarah felt her stomach clench. "She said it wasn't right," Thomas continued, barely audible. "She looked so disappointed. Like I'd betrayed her. I just wanted to talk. To explain. I asked her to meet me later, by the garden. She said no. She said she was leaving in the morning. And she didn't show up to evening prayer," he said. "I went to look for her. I found her walking near the chapel. I tried to stop her just to talk, but she got scared. She started yelling." Sarah leaned forward, voice low. "And then?" Thomas covered his face with his hands. "I don't know what happened. I reached for her arm. She pulled away, stumbled, hit her head on the stone steps. There was blood. Not much, but she was unconscious. I didn't mean to hurt her." "And what did you do next?" "I panicked. I dragged her to the well. I thought she'd wake up. I didn't know what to do." "Did you throw her in?" Sarah's voice was quiet, but it cut like a knife. "No," he gasped. "No, I left her near it. I thought she'd wake up. But when I came back, she was gone." "And you didn't report any of this?" "I was scared," he said, choking on the words. "Father Michael would expel me. Or worse." Sarah stood. "You should have thought of that before dragging an unconscious girl into the woods." As she stepped out into the hallway, she radioed the team stationed at the well. "Search the perimeter. Expand the grid. If she crawled away from the well, there may be a trail." Hours passed in a blur of motion. The forensic team combed the garden, the nearby path, and the underbrush surrounding the well. A few drops of dried blood were found on a patch of moss-covered stone near the chapel's rear steps, consistent with a fall. But the body, the girl, remained missing. It was Rex who found the next clue. As Sarah reviewed photographs in the mobile lab, Rex began barking insistently near the edge of the chapel grounds. She followed him, weaving through hedges and low shrubs until he stopped before a patch of disturbed earth, nose pressed low. Sarah knelt beside him, brushed away a thin layer of dirt, and revealed the torn corner of a hoodie. A deep gray fabric with a fleck of dried crimson near the edge. It was Emily's. She called it in immediately. As the evidence bag was sealed, Sarah's mind churned. Thomas's story was too incomplete. Too convenient. Emily had been moved, or someone had moved her after. And that someone might still be inside the monastery. Whether it was a cover-up or something darker, Sarah could feel the shadows tightening around her. She would not stop until they broke open. Chapter 4: The Secret Cellar. Darkness had begun to settle over Pine Hollow by the time Sarah returned to the monastery with fresh search warrants and a renewed sense of urgency burning in her chest. The revelations from Brother Thomas had shifted the nature of the investigation entirely. No longer was this a case of simple disappearance or neglect. Now it was about obstruction, about concealment, and very likely, about something far more sinister. The fabric scrap found near the well, paired with Thomas's shaky confession, was damning, but not conclusive. Emily was still missing, and Sarah knew from years of bitter experience that confessions made in panic could be riddled with half-truths, omissions, or worse, intentional misdirection. She didn't believe the young monk had acted alone. And she didn't believe for a second that the abbot, Father Michael, knew nothing. The fog had thickened again, blanketing the monastery grounds in a layer of ghostly silver. It clung to the trees, curled around the chapel's stone buttresses, and swallowed light wherever it touched. Sarah moved through it quickly, with Rex at her side and 2 officers trailing behind, their boots crunching over gravel and wet leaves. She felt the weight of the place growing heavier as the night deepened. This was no longer just an investigation. It was a descent. Inside, Father Michael met them with his hands folded calmly, but Sarah immediately noticed the tension in his posture, the stiffness behind his smile. She didn't wait for pleasantries. "We'll be conducting a full search of the premises. You'll cooperate, or you'll be removed." His lips tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, detective. This is still the house of God." "Then you have nothing to hide," Sarah said flatly, brushing past him. They started with the chapel, then moved through the cloisters, the dormitories, and the storage halls. It was a slow, exhaustive process. Rooms meticulously examined, walls tapped, floors probed, every robe and book and box scrutinized. The monks remained mostly in their cells under supervision, but Sarah could feel their unease lingering in the air, thick as incense. Still, nothing substantial turned up, until Rex began barking. It was near the east wall of the inner courtyard, where a cluster of ivy-covered statues lined the perimeter. Rex had frozen by a weathered stretch of stone that seemed unremarkable at first glance. Just another piece of the monastery's centuries-old architecture. But then he barked again, louder this time, claws scrabbling at the base of the wall. Sarah stepped in, pulling aside the thick vines. Beneath the leafy curtain, her fingers found a slight indentation, a gap, nearly invisible in the mortar, with a faint iron latch buried in the stone. She exchanged a glance with her team, then pulled. The wall gave with a reluctant groan, revealing a narrow stone passageway sloping downward into darkness. The air that emerged was damp, stale, and laced with the unmistakable scent of mold and rot. Flashlights snapped on. Rex growled once, then descended without hesitation. Sarah followed, heart pounding, flashlight beam cutting through the blackness. The stairs were slick with moss, carved crudely from stone and worn smooth with age. The deeper they went, the colder it became, as if they were descending not just into the earth but into a different time altogether, one where silence reigned and secrets were sealed behind stone. The chamber at the bottom was small, perhaps 10 feet by 10, with a low ceiling and walls slick with condensation. Crates and rusted tools lined one side, but what drew Sarah's eyes was in the far corner. A crumpled brown robe, stained dark in places, and beside it, a pale object tangled in filthy ribbon, blonde hair. The flashlight beam trembled slightly as she stepped forward. It was a lock of hair, unmistakably torn from someone's head. Next to it, a folded, water-stained piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "If anyone finds this, please help me. My name is Emily Carter. I'm trapped. I don't know how long I've been here. I think they drugged me. Brother Thomas knows. Please, tell my family." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, her throat tightening. The evidence was mounting, and yet Emily still remained just out of reach, like a voice heard in a dream, fading just before waking. As the forensic team sealed the note and collected samples from the robe and hair, Sarah turned slowly in place, scanning the walls for any sign of how someone could be held here. There were scuff marks near the base of one wall, and what looked like dried blood smeared faintly across the stone. Chains once affixed to the wall had been removed, but their rusted bolts remained. Whoever had built this place hadn't intended it for wine storage or food preservation. It was a holding cell, plain and simple. Back above ground, Sarah brought Father Michael back into the guest house, her demeanor cold and controlled. He remained composed, but there was a flicker, barely visible, in his eyes when she told him what they had found. "A lock of her hair," she said, laying the evidence bag on the table, "in a sealed chamber behind your chapel." "I have no knowledge of such a place," he replied, but the denial was automatic, and Sarah had interrogated enough suspects to recognize the difference between a lie told in fear and one told with practiced precision. "I find that hard to believe," she said, leaning closer, "especially since we also found a handwritten note, naming Brother Thomas and begging for help." Father Michael's hands rested on the table, fingers interlaced. "Brother Thomas is a troubled young man. Perhaps he acted alone." "And the secret passage? The chains? The blood? Those were installed by accident." He didn't respond. "Do you know where she is?" Sarah asked, her voice low and even. "I do not," he said after a moment. Sarah nodded slowly. "Then I'll find her, with or without your help." Back at the station that night, Brother Thomas was no longer defiant. Under the harsh glow of the interrogation room, his resolve had crumbled. Tears streaked down his face as he clutched at the edges of his robe like a child clinging to a blanket. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he sobbed. "I just didn't want her to ruin everything. I panicked. I took her to the cellar. I thought she'd calm down. But she wouldn't stop screaming." Sarah said nothing, just watched him unravel. She hit her head. Then she stopped moving. "I thought maybe she was dead. So I left. But when I went back, she was gone. I don't know what happened. I swear." Sarah leaned in, voice cold. "Then someone else moved her." He said nothing, only cried harder. Sarah walked out of the room, the weight of the investigation heavier than ever. The evidence was beginning to form a grim mosaic. Emily had been silenced, hidden, possibly killed, and the people responsible were not acting alone. Someone else had accessed the cellar. Someone else had removed her body. And deep in her gut, Sarah knew who that someone might be. Father Michael had worn his piety-like armor, but that armor was cracking. And behind it, something darker waited to be uncovered. Chapter 5: The Monastery's Dark Past. The following morning broke with an overcast sky, casting a steel-gray light across the forested hills of Pine Hollow. The fog still clung to the earth like a secret, heavy and damp, refusing to lift. At the police station, Sarah sat hunched over a table cluttered with photographs, evidence bags, and transcripts, her mind piecing together the broken timeline like a jigsaw puzzle missing its center. Every piece she placed deepened the pit in her stomach. Emily Carter had vanished under suspicious circumstances, her last moments partially reconstructed from a journal, a blood-streaked robe, and the unraveling confession of a young monk. But something still didn't fit. Brother Thomas's story, while damning, lacked the control and calculation that would be required to make someone disappear so completely. Sarah had interviewed enough criminals to know when someone had snapped versus when someone had covered a crime. And this, she feared, was both. Forensics had confirmed that the hair found in the cellar was Emily's. Traces of blood on the stone walls matched her DNA. But the room, sealed, hidden, deliberately erased from any map or record, was not something Thomas had stumbled upon. It was something someone had led him to. And the only person with that kind of knowledge, the only one with full access and authority, was Father Michael. As Sarah reviewed older files from previous unsolved cases in the region, something caught her eye, a report from 5 years ago. A young woman named Claire Monroe, age 22, had vanished after attending a retreat at St. Benedict. The case had grown cold quickly. No signs of struggle. No leads. No body. The police at the time had assumed she'd left town of her own accord, possibly overwhelmed by mental health issues. But now, with Emily's disappearance casting long shadows, that assumption felt woefully naive. Sarah pulled the file and began cross-referencing names. That's when she found the connection. Claire had last been seen in the garden, near the same chapel steps where Emily had allegedly fallen. Claire had also expressed discomfort during her stay, according to a friend who'd attended the retreat with her but left early. And most chillingly, Claire had reportedly confronted a monk about financial irregularities. That monk's name was listed, Brother James. Armed with this new lead, Sarah returned to the monastery before noon. The air had grown colder, the clouds heavier, pressing down on the old stone buildings like a weight from above. Brother James, now in his 40s with streaks of gray in his beard and a worn calm in his eyes, met her in the garden where he tended to a row of frost-bitten herbs. He looked up when she approached, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," she said. They sat in the refectory, a private room far from the other monks. Sarah laid out a photograph of Claire Monroe and watched closely for any flicker of recognition. James's eyes lingered a moment too long. "She came here in the spring of 2020, Sarah said. "She was last seen near the chapel. You were assigned to groundskeeping that year." James didn't deny it. "I remember her. She disappeared." He nodded slowly. "Yes. Did you know why?" He hesitated. Then, to Sarah's surprise, he spoke. "She found out. About the money. About Michael." Sarah didn't interrupt. "She caught me taking from the offering box. Small amounts here and there. She confronted me. Threatened to report it. I told Michael. I thought he would handle it. Calm her down. Ask her to leave, maybe. Instead, he told me to make sure she didn't talk. Said it would destroy the mission if word got out. That we'd lose everything." Sarah leaned forward. "So what did you do?" His jaw clenched. "I confronted her again. She refused to stay silent. We argued. She slapped me. But I snapped. I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted to scare her. I pushed her. She hit her head. And then I buried her. Behind the chapel. Beneath the oak tree." Sarah's breath caught. "You didn't tell anyone?" "I told Michael," James said bitterly. "And he told me to keep quiet. He said God would forgive me, but the world wouldn't." Sarah stood slowly, already calling for a team to start digging. Hours later, beneath the twisted roots of an old oak tree, they unearthed a cloth-wrapped bundle of bones. Dental records confirmed what Sarah already knew. Claire Monroe had been there all along, decomposing under the soil in silence. Brother James was arrested immediately. But Sarah knew that the true architect of all this was still walking free. Father Michael. Later that night, as she returned to the monastery one final time, she brought with her not just officers but a warrant. Father Michael greeted her at the door, eyes cold, hands steady. He said nothing as she informed him of James's confession. Nothing when she presented the photograph of Claire's remains. Nothing when she opened his desk drawer and retrieved a locked ledger, hidden beneath layers of church documents and letters. But when she finally cracked the book open and saw the neatly handwritten notes, donation amounts, withdrawals, names, she saw the truth. Emily had been the final thread in a tapestry woven with greed and guilt. And when she tugged it, the whole thing had begun to unravel. "You knew," Sarah said quietly. Father Michael looked at her for a long moment. "They were threats," he said softly. "All of them. Each of them came here seeking peace and left wanting to burn it down. They wanted the truth. They wanted power, he snapped, voice sharp for the first time. They thought they were better than us. They didn't understand sacrifice. They understood conscience, Sarah said. In his office, she found more than ledgers. She found photos, young women smiling on retreat, unaware of what awaited them. She found letters from parents, thanking the monastery for changing their daughters' lives. She found personal notes addressed to Anna, a woman Sarah had spoken to only briefly during the early days of the investigation. A former volunteer, a name that now surfaced like a submerged stone. Anna had contacted Sarah once, offering vague suspicions about the monastery but never following up. Now, seeing her name in Michael's handwriting, scattered among coded financial notes, Sarah knew there was more. And as Father Michael was led away in handcuffs, silent, proud, and unrepentant, Sarah felt no triumph. Only a grim certainty that the story wasn't over. That Anna was the next link. That somewhere, buried beneath layers of faith and silence, there were still more truths waiting to claw their way to the surface. Chapter 6: The Betrayal. The cold wind swept through Pine Hollow like an omen as Sarah sat in her car just outside the town's modest diner, engine idling, eyes locked on the figure inside. Anna Hargrove, former monastery volunteer, age 28, soft-spoken, neatly dressed, with a habit of avoiding eye contact and offering just enough information to seem helpful without ever revealing anything of value. Sarah had spoken to her briefly when Emily was first reported missing. At the time, Anna had claimed she hadn't been involved with St. Benedict for nearly a year and that she didn't know much about current operations. But now, that lie had unraveled like the frayed edge of a prayer cloth. Her name, scribbled repeatedly in Father Michael's secret ledger, appeared alongside coded transfers and initials next to dates. Dates that matched the arrivals of women who would later vanish without explanation. Anna hadn't just known. She'd been part of it. Sarah stepped out of the car and entered the diner, the bell above the door giving a hollow ring. The smell of coffee and fried eggs filled the air, but the warmth did nothing to ease the tightness in her chest. She approached Anna slowly, watching the woman's posture stiffen before she even spoke. "We need to talk," Sarah said quietly. Anna didn't argue. She simply nodded and followed Sarah outside, down the street to a small municipal building where a plain interrogation room waited, cold and uninviting. Inside, Sarah didn't waste time. She laid the ledger on the table, flipping to a page with Anna's name clearly printed in Michael's steady handwriting. Next to it, a number, a date, a name, Emily Carter. "I don't want to do this," Anna whispered, already trembling. "You're going to," Sarah replied, "because Emily deserves that. Claire deserved that. Others, however many there were, deserve that. And so do you. You've carried this long enough." Anna didn't move at first. Her hands clenched in her lap. Her eyes darted toward the door as if still calculating the odds of escape. But then, like a dam cracking under the weight of its own silence, her shoulders sank and her voice broke. "I met Father Michael when I was 21, she said. "I had just lost my job. I was broke, depressed. The monastery offered me peace, purpose. At first, it was beautiful. I really believed in it. I helped with the retreats, worked the kitchen, even guided meditation sessions. But then things changed. He started asking me to befriend certain girls, ones who seemed lonely, fragile. I thought it was about helping them open up. But after a while, I realized he was choosing them for a reason." Sarah remained silent, letting the woman's guilt pour out without interruption. "He would ask me to encourage them to stay longer, talk to them about their families, their jobs, whether they trusted people. I didn't know what he was doing at first. I swear I didn't. But then the first girl disappeared, Rebecca. She was quiet, sweet. She talked about going back to school. Then one day she just left. No goodbye. No forwarding contact. He told us she had an emergency and left in the night. But I never saw her again. And there was no emergency. Sarah's knuckles tightened around her pen. Why didn't you go to the police? Because I didn't want to believe it, Anna said, her voice cracking. And because by then he had something on me. I'd taken money. Just small things at first. He caught me and said it was okay, that God forgives. But then he used it. Told me if I ever talked, I'd go down with him. That I was complicit. And he was right. I was. Emily? Sarah asked softly. Anna nodded. He told me to watch her. Said she was too smart. Too curious. She asked questions. She stayed up at night writing in her journal. She spoke to Thomas more than she let on. I told Michael she was going to be trouble. And then, Sarah pressed. He told me to distract her, get her to relax. I tried, but she didn't trust me. She was scared, and then one night she went missing. Michael said she had a breakdown and ran off. I knew it was a lie, but I didn't say anything. I was afraid. I didn't know what had happened, until now. Sarah leaned forward, her voice low and steady. He used you. He manipulated you. But if you want to make this right, you'll testify. Anna looked up, tears running down her face. I will. The plea deal was swift. Anna provided a full statement, implicating Father Michael not only in the disappearance of Emily and Claire, but in the systemic abuse and silencing of at least 5 other young women over the past decade. She detailed how he selected his targets, always vulnerable, always isolated, and how he used fear, guilt, and theology as tools to control those around him. She explained how money flowed in and out of the retreat programs through offshore accounts and anonymous donors, with Anna acting as courier and silent accomplice. Her testimony cracked the investigation wide open. The media descended on Pine Hollow like vultures. News trucks lined the streets, reporters camped outside the police department, and headlines screamed across the country, Monastery of Secrets, Preacher of Shadows, the disappeared daughters. Father Michael, Thomas, James, and now Anna were charged with a slew of crimes ranging from manslaughter to conspiracy, from financial fraud to obstruction of justice. The trial, when it came, was a storm of public outrage and painful testimony. Parents of the missing sat in the gallery, weeping quietly as details emerged about sellers, coercion, bribes, and silent complicity. Anna wept through most of her time on the stand but never wavered. Her words were the final nail. Father Michael showed no emotion as he was sentenced to life without parole. Thomas and James received 25 years each. Anna, though spared the full brunt of the law, was sentenced to 15 years for her role as enabler. She accepted it without protest. St. Benedict Monastery was shuttered permanently. Its artifacts redistributed to neighboring churches, its grounds fenced off and deemed a crime scene. What had once been a place of stillness and reflection was now a hollow relic of betrayal and suffering. The town of Pine Hollow, shaken to its core, began the long, slow work of healing. Sarah stood outside the courthouse the day sentencing concluded, her coat drawn tightly against the wind, Rex sitting faithfully at her side. The golden retriever had aged since the beginning, his muzzle grayer, his gait a little slower, but his eyes were still sharp, still steady. He looked up at her, sensing the shift, the moment of quiet after a storm. She looked down at him and whispered, "We did it." But even as she said it, she knew the story wasn't entirely over. The names in the ledger weren't all accounted for. Some victims were never found. And there were whispers, old monks who had left years before, others who had known and stayed silent. Shadows still lingered. But for now, justice had been served. The monastery had fallen. and the truth had finally found its voice. Chapter 7: The Final Witness. Months passed, and though the legal process had drawn to a close, the ripples of the St. Benedict case continued to spread like oil across still water. Pine Hollow, once a quiet and unassuming retreat town, had become a symbol of institutional betrayal. Sarah Collins found herself at the center of something far greater than any case she'd handled before, not just because of the number of victims or the depth of the corruption, but because of how close it had come to being buried. If it hadn't been for Rex, if it hadn't been for Emily's journal, if it hadn't been for the final moments of conscience from people like Anna, the truth might have remained forever locked beneath the stone floor of an old monastery. Yet even as she tried to move forward, there was one thing Sarah couldn't shake: the feeling that the story wasn't over. It began with a letter. It arrived on a rainy Wednesday afternoon in a plain envelope, no return address, no markings beyond her name scrawled in uneven handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it, in shaky cursive, were only a few lines. "You don't know the whole story. I was there when it started. I can show you what Michael never wanted found. D." Sarah sat frozen at her desk, rereading the letter over and over. Her instincts flared immediately. Hoaxes weren't uncommon after high-profile cases, especially ones that stirred national attention. But something about the phrasing, the timidity in the handwriting, the absence of any demand or attention-seeking language, struck her as authentic. She scanned it for fingerprints, then cross-referenced the monogram D with every known former member of the monastery, filtering down through records and exit interviews. Only one name matched: Brother Daniel. He had left St. Benedict over 10 years ago, citing personal loss of faith as the reason. At the time, it hadn't raised suspicion. Monks came and went quietly, and Daniel had vanished into the Adirondacks, where he was believed to have taken up a solitary life in the mountains. But now he had resurfaced, and Sarah knew she had to follow that trail. 2 days later, after a long drive north through winding forest roads, Sarah and Rex found themselves standing at the foot of a small wooden cabin nestled between pines that rose like sentinels toward a bleak gray sky. The structure was humble, clearly handmade, weather-beaten from years of solitude. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney. As she approached, Rex sniffed the air cautiously but made no signs of alarm. When Sarah knocked, the door opened slowly, revealing a man whose face had clearly once been youthful but was now lined with time and guilt. Brother Daniel, now just Daniel, looked thinner than his photos, his frame lean from years of self-sufficiency, hair long and tied back, eyes pale blue and hollow. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "I don't ignore letters," Sarah replied. He stepped aside silently and let her in. The cabin was sparse. A wood-burning stove crackled in the corner. Shelves lined the walls, filled with theology books, journals, and a few old photographs yellowed with age. In the center of the room sat a small metal safe bolted to the floor. Daniel walked to it wordlessly and unlocked it with a key that had hung around his neck like a talisman. "I kept it hidden for years," he said. "I thought maybe someone would come for it. Or maybe I'd forget. But when I saw what happened, I knew I couldn't carry it alone anymore." Inside the safe were dozens of pages, handwritten letters, some with bloodstains, some singed at the edges, and a small box containing an old flip phone, a memory card, and a worn leather journal that Sarah recognized instantly, another belonging to Claire Monroe. "These are hers?" she asked, heart tight in her chest. Daniel nodded. "She came to me. She was scared. She said Michael had threatened her, that she'd found evidence of donations being laundered through false outreach programs. She was smart, organized. She wrote everything down. But when she vanished, I knew. I knew he'd done something." Sarah flipped through the journal, scanning names, numbers, and details that filled in all the gaps. Claire hadn't just suspected the corruption. She had documented it meticulously. One entry listed a previously unknown accomplice, Brother Paul, the monastery's former treasurer, who had left shortly after Claire's disappearance and had never been located. "I think he knew," Daniel said quietly. "He was involved. He was the one who made the money move. But after Claire disappeared, he panicked. He packed up and vanished. Michael never spoke of him again." Sarah pocketed the evidence, her mind already spinning. The case wasn't just deeper than they'd realized, it was still active. Brother Paul had escaped, and with him, the last living thread of the operation's inner workings. She had to find him. Weeks passed as Sarah scoured financial records, travel manifests, property holdings, anything that might link Paul to a location. Finally, one obscure land purchase led her to a storage unit outside Albany. Hidden within was a second set of ledgers, matching those of Michael's but older, records of the first years of the operation, names that went even further back, and disturbing entries detailing how accidents had been covered up or coerced into silence. It took 3 more weeks to track Paul to a remote mountain home near the Canadian border. When she arrived, Paul tried to run. Rex took him down in seconds. In interrogation, Paul was calm, cold, and unapologetic. "It was a system," he said. "Michael had the vision. I just made sure it ran smoothly. We weren't killing them. We were cleansing the institution, removing threats. That's what he believed." "And you?" Sarah asked. He shrugged. "I believed in order. That's all." Paul was sentenced to life imprisonment, and with that, the last lock on the vault of silence was broken. Sarah stood in the courtroom on the day of his sentencing, her mind weary but resolute. She had seen the full shape of the rot. From whispers in journals to bones in soil, from blood on robes to faces in ledgers. The monastery had died long before it was closed. It had simply taken time for its ghosts to find the right voice. Chapter 8: Light at the end of the tunnel. The rain had softened to a drizzle by the time Sarah reached the cemetery. Rows of modest gravestones stretched across the hillside like pages in a quiet book, their inscriptions worn but unwavering. The pine trees stood tall around them, guardians of memory and silence. Rex walked beside her without a leash, his head low, tail still, a silent companion who had been there through every scream behind stone walls, every secret dragged from the dark. They stopped in front of the marker that bore Emily Carter's name. Simple. Too soon. A bouquet of white lilies lay at the base of the stone, damp from the rain. Sarah knelt and placed a fresh lily beside it, her hand lingering as she traced the engraving with her fingertips. She didn't speak. Not yet. Not until the moment settled. The air around her was cold but gentle, as if the forest itself had paused to listen. She remembered Emily's photo, brighted, smiling, hopeful. She remembered her handwriting in the journal, determined even in fear. She remembered the desperation in her words, "If this is found, please help me." And now, after months of dead ends, betrayal, unmarked graves, and hidden ledgers, the promise Sarah had made silently at the beginning had finally been honored. The truth had emerged. Justice, however imperfect, had been served. But there was no victory in it. Only stillness. Only a kind of peace born from exhaustion and grief. A voice broke the silence, gruff but sincere. She believed in good people. Sarah turned. An older man stood nearby, hat in hand, hair silver at the temples. His face was lined by time and loss. She recognized him from the court proceedings. He had sat in the back, quiet, steadfast, the way someone only sits when they have nothing left to say. This was Emily's uncle. She believed people would do the right thing if given the chance, he said, stepping closer. You proved her right. Sarah shook her head slightly. I did what I had to. He offered a sad smile. That's what makes it matter. They stood in silence for a long moment, listening to the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Then he reached into his coat and handed her a folded piece of paper. On it was a drawing, childlike, rough, but full of love. Emily had drawn it when she was 6. 2 stick figures, one taller than the other, holding hands beside a tree with big, messy branches. Above it, in uneven crayon letters, it read, "You and me always." She used to say that to her mother, the man said, even when she was older, every time she left the house. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, something warm and painful at once. She nodded, unable to speak, and folded the paper gently, placing it inside her coat. "I'm sorry for what happened to her," she finally said. "I'm sorry we couldn't stop it in time." "You stopped it for the next one," he replied. "That's more than most ever do." Later that day, Sarah returned to the station. The press had mostly gone, the buzz had quieted, and the town had begun to breathe again. But the scars were there, in cautious glances, in shuttered businesses, in the hollow pews of the churches. Healing would come slowly and incompletely. But it had begun. In the lobby, a box sat addressed to her. No return address. Inside was a polished bronze medallion shaped like a paw print. An inscription on the back read, "To Rex, for loyalty, courage, and truth." There was also a letter from a national animal rescue organization, thanking the Pine Hollow K-9 unit for their role in solving one of the decade's most harrowing cases. Sarah walked into the squad room and found Rex curled under her desk, dozing. She knelt beside him, scratching behind his ears, then carefully placed the medallion around his collar. He opened one eye, blinked slowly, and rested his head back on her boot. "You earned it, partner," she whispered. That night, as Sarah drove home through the winding roads that led past the monastery, now shuttered, its gates sealed, its windows dark, she let the silence ride with her. She didn't turn on the radio. She didn't check her phone. She just let the hum of the tires and the soft panting of Rex fill the car. The forest, once ominous, now felt different. Not safe, not innocent, but quieter, as if it too was resting. When she arrived at her small house just beyond the town limits, she sat on the porch for a long while, watching mist curl over the treetops in the fading dusk. She thought about Claire, about Anna, about the unnamed girls whose files she'd pored over. She thought about the ones they'd never find, the voices lost to silence, the letters that would never be mailed, the prayers unanswered. She didn't believe in clean endings. Not anymore. Evil didn't vanish. It retreated, adapted, waited. But she did believe in resistance, in witnesses, in people who refused to look away. People who kept digging, people who chased whispers into the woods because their gut told them the world doesn't fix itself. Rex padded out beside her and curled up at her feet. Sarah leaned back in her chair, let the wind tug at her hair, and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, there would be another report, another case, another long drive into someone else's darkness. But for tonight, the story had a pause. Not an ending. Just the smallest sliver of light breaking through the trees. And in that sliver, she allowed herself, for the first time in weeks, to breathe. Chapter 9 Aftermath. Weeks passed, then months. The snow came early that year, blanketing Pine Hollow in white, softening the edges of rooftops, muffling footsteps, concealing the bones of a town still trying to heal. From the outside, life had resumed its rhythm. Storefronts reopened, children trudged through slush on their way to school, and the coffee shop on Main Street brewed its usual winter blends. But beneath that fragile return to normalcy, the echoes of St. Benedict still lingered like soot in the walls of a fire-damaged house. Nothing burned visibly anymore, but the smell of smoke never truly left. The townspeople walked slower now. Conversations were shorter, quieter. There was a hesitancy in their smiles, a shared memory that hovered just behind their eyes. The monastery, once the pride of Pine Hollow, had become a scar on the landscape. Its stone towers remained standing, cordoned off behind rusted fencing and warning signs, an empty relic of misplaced faith and hidden cruelty. Some avoided even looking in its direction. Others stared too long. Sarah felt it every day, each time she walked into a store, stopped at a gas station, or drove through the center of town in her patrol SUV. People nodded to her, thanked her, sometimes quietly offered prayers, but there was something else in their gaze, a mixture of gratitude and unease. As if by dragging the truth into daylight, she had also torn open something they hadn't wanted to see. Many in Pine Hollow had trusted the monastery. Some had volunteered there. A few had sent their children on retreat weekends. The betrayal cut deeper because it had worn the mask of holiness. She didn't blame them, but she carried it. At the station, the bulletin board had changed. Where once there had been open cases and shift rotations, now there were newspaper clippings, commendations, letters from families across the state. Rex's photo, taken at the courthouse steps, medal around his neck, hung in the center. He had become a symbol of something rare and simple: loyalty, pure and without complication. People needed symbols. Sarah understood that now better than ever. But symbols weren't shields. At night, in the silence of her home, she still woke sometimes to memories. The scent of mildew in the hidden cellar. The weight of Claire's journal. The way Father Michael's voice never wavered, not even when the final verdict was read. Evil didn't always look monstrous. Sometimes it spoke softly, wore robes, and preached forgiveness while hiding skeletons beneath floorboards. Rex, ever by her side, seemed to sense when the memories crept too close. He would nudge her hand, press his head against her knee, sit with her in the quiet until her breath slowed and the shadows receded. One afternoon, she was invited to speak at a local high school. The auditorium was quiet when she stepped onto the stage, the students shifting in their seats, unsure of what to expect. She hadn't prepared a speech. She didn't want to give one. Instead, she told them about Emily, about bravery that doesn't look like charging into danger, but instead writing the truth in a notebook and hiding it under a floorboard, about what it meant to listen when your instincts tell you something is wrong, about asking questions, even when the person you're questioning wears a collar or a badge or speaks in prayers. When she finished, there was no applause, just silence, thoughtful, heavy. And that, she realized, was better than clapping. Outside, one of the teachers handed her a note. It had been left anonymously. It read, "I was scared to tell anyone what I saw, but now I think maybe I should. Thank you." That was the thing about aftermaths. They didn't end when the gavel dropped. They unfolded quietly, day by day, in unseen conversations and anonymous notes. In the way a town rebuilt its trust, not in institutions, but in one another. Back at the station, a new case file landed on her desk. Nothing remarkable. A missing person from a neighboring town. A young woman, last seen at a wellness retreat in a recently opened center on the outskirts of the county. The name of the retreat rang a faint bell, but Sarah wasn't sure why at first. Then she saw the signature at the bottom of the registration form. A name she hadn't heard in months. Anna Hargrove. Released early on parole. Relocated. Starting over. Sarah stared at the paper for a long time. It didn't mean anything. Not yet. But maybe it did. She reached down and rested her hand on Rex's head. He looked up at her, eyes clear, ears twitching. "Looks like we're not done," she murmured. And somewhere, deep in the snowy woods, another story was beginning to stir. Chapter 10: Fragile Hope. Spring returned to Pine Hollow not with fanfare, but with the quiet insistence of life continuing. The snow melted in slow surrender, revealing soft earth beneath, The pines shed their white cloaks, and early buds formed on the tips of the branches, timid and tentative, as if unsure the world was ready to bloom again. The town, too, had begun to thaw, not just in temperature, but in spirit. For the first time in nearly a year, there were smiles not burdened by grief, laughter that didn't immediately feel out of place. And amid it all, Sarah Collins kept walking forward, step by steady step, carrying the weight of what had been and the faintest hope of what could still be. Her days had returned to routine: paperwork, morning patrols, cups of coffee cooling too quickly on her desk. But the rhythm had changed. She found herself listening more closely, noticing the quiet moments others passed by. A girl alone at a bus stop with her backpack clutched tight. A boy at the edge of the playground staring into the trees. The things people didn't say. She trusted silence less now. Not because it always meant danger, but because sometimes it hid the things people were most afraid to voice. Rex remained a constant. Older now, his joints a little stiffer, his naps longer, but still alert. Still loyal. When Sarah moved through town, Rex at her side, she noticed how people greeted him more than her. Children came up just to pet him. Strangers offered treats. He had become a symbol of truth, of endurance, of the idea that sometimes goodness wasn't loud but steady, watching, protecting. And Sarah was content to let him take that place. He had earned it more than anyone. One afternoon, she returned to the cemetery where Emily was buried. The grass had grown greener since her last visit, the ground firm underfoot. A small wind chime hung from a nearby tree, its sound faint but bright. Sarah knelt and laid a single lily on the grave, not for ceremony, but for memory. She sat there for a while, Rex lying beside her, and thought not of the case, or the horror, or the courtroom, but of Emily. The girl, the daughter, the voice, the one who had written, "If someone finds this," and someone had. Sarah had. And it had changed everything. Behind her, she heard soft footsteps. Turning, she saw Emily's mother standing quietly at a distance, arms wrapped around herself, eyes glistening not with fresh tears, but with the kind that remained even after the storm had passed. She approached slowly and sat beside Sarah without a word. For a while, they said nothing. There was nothing new to say, only a shared presence. Then the woman whispered, she loved to write stories. When she was little, she'd fill notebooks with made-up worlds and brave girls who stopped monsters with nothing but their voice. I think part of her believed that if you said something out loud, the truth would have power. Sarah nodded, eyes still on the gravestone. She was right. She never got to finish those stories, the woman added softly. Maybe not, Sarah said. But she started one that changed everything. They sat until the sun dipped below the hills, until the pine shadows stretched long across the cemetery, until even the chime fell still in the windless air. In the following weeks, Sarah received a letter from the state attorney general's office. It confirmed the establishment of a new task force, one that would investigate abuses of power within religious institutions. She had been invited to consult on training, on case review, on policy. Her first instinct was to decline. She had seen enough. She had lived enough. But then she thought of the anonymous note from the high school student. The quiet thanks from grieving families. The weight of stories still buried. And she said yes. She also agreed to speak at a memorial organized by families of the victims. It was held on a grassy knoll just outside the former monastery grounds, now a designated historical crime site. There were no speeches, only readings, from journals, letters, old essays left behind. Sarah read a passage from Claire Monroe's notebook, then one from Emily's journal. Not for the cameras, not for closure, but because those words were the last true thing those girls had left the world. Afterward, an older woman approached her, gray-haired, eyes sharp. My daughter was supposed to go to that retreat, she said. But she got sick. Cancelled at the last minute. I've never stopped thinking about how close it was. Sarah placed a hand gently on the woman's arm. Then maybe that means she's meant to do something with that second chance. The woman nodded slowly, and they both turned to look at the row of candles flickering in the breeze. That night, back at home, Sarah sat on her porch with Rex, a blanket over her knees, the stars sharp above the treetops. She thought of how stories ended, not with victory or punishment or even resolution, but with a breath, a choice, a turning point. Her story hadn't ended, nor had Pine Hollows, nor would the echoes of the monastery ever truly vanish. But in that moment, with the air warm, the world quiet, and Rex resting peacefully at her feet, she allowed herself something she hadn't dared in a long time. She hoped. Not blindly, not foolishly, but with the understanding that darkness didn't vanish because light showed up. It only shrank when enough people chose to hold that light up even when their arms shook. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Chapter 11: An Endless Fight. It was nearly midnight when the call came. Sarah had just begun to doze off. Rex curled up at the foot of her bed, the house quiet, the night thick with the kind of stillness only early spring could bring. The phone's ring sliced through the silence like a blade. She sat up, blinked, reached for it with that instinctive urgency that never fully left you once you'd seen too much. On the other end, the dispatcher's voice was tense. A young woman had gone missing, last seen at a newly opened meditation retreat center on the outskirts of town. Not St. Benedict, not the monastery, but close enough to make the hair on the back of Sarah's neck stand up. She was already pulling on her jacket before the dispatcher had finished speaking. Rex lifted his head, ears twitching, already sensing something had changed. Within minutes, they were in the SUV, headlights slicing through the darkness, tires humming against the wet asphalt. The road to the retreat center wound through forest Sarah knew too well. Dense, pine-lined, the kind that swallowed light and memory if you weren't careful. As she drove, her thoughts returned to the last file she'd read, the name at the bottom of the intake form, Anna Hargrove. It wasn't just coincidence. It never was. The center itself stood in eerie contrast to the ruins of St. Benedict. It was sleek, minimalist, all glass and steel and glowing solar-powered walkways. The sign read, Sanctum Renewal Center, with a soft font and a lotus emblem, as if cleansing the soul required rebranding. But the feeling it gave her was the same, a practiced piece that tried too hard to convince you it was safe. As she stepped out of the vehicle, Rex at her side, she saw the center director already waiting, a man in his 30s with perfect posture, a serene smile, and hands that fidgeted slightly behind his back. She checked in 3 days ago, he said quickly. Her name is Lydia Summers. 24. She came alone. We didn't notice anything strange until this morning. Her bed untouched, belongings still there. We assumed she'd taken a hike early. But she never came back. Sarah nodded slowly, her gaze drifting toward the tree line. And Anna Hargrove? The man blinked. She's a volunteer here. Just started last month. But she's not involved in any guest processing. Strictly admin. Sarah didn't respond. She simply called Rex to heel and began walking. The retreat grounds were expansive, garden paths, reflection ponds, minimalist dormitories, everything designed to exude calm. But in the stillness, Sarah noticed the same things she'd noticed at St. Benedict. The unnatural order, the absence of clutter, the way some spaces felt too clean, too prepared. They reached Lydia's room, immaculate, undisturbed, with a journal left open on the desk. Sarah scanned it. The last entry was dated the night before her disappearance. The others don't talk much. One of the staff keeps asking about my family. Says I have a sensitive aura. Something doesn't feel right. It wasn't proof, but it was enough. Sarah called it in as a formal missing persons case and requested full access to the facility. The director hesitated until she mentioned the names Emily Carter and Claire Monroe. That shut him up. By sunrise, the grounds were cordoned off. Officers began searching the perimeter. Rex moved ahead, nose low, tail stiff. It didn't take long. Near the edge of the property, behind a line of ornamental pines, Rex froze, then barked sharply. Sarah ran to his side and saw it. Disturbed earth, recently covered with loose mulch. She dropped to her knees and began clearing it away with her hands. No body, just a hole. Empty, but deep. Too deep to be recent. As the forensic team arrived, the dig expanded. What they found stunned even the most hardened officers. Wooden crates. Inside them, burned documents, partially destroyed phones, traces of dried blood. One document still legible listed 3 names, Lydia's among them. Another had initials that matched Anna's. The boxes weren't just evidence. They were trophies. Remnants of a system that had never truly ended. Sarah stood over the site, heart pounding, not with fear, but with fury. This wasn't over. It had never really ended. Saint Benedict had fallen, but its branches had spread. New names, new faces, new buildings. The rot had survived. Later that day, she found Anna. The woman sat in the administrative office, composed, polite, hands folded on the desk. She didn't look surprised when Sarah walked in. "I wondered how long it would take," Anna said softly. Sarah stared at her. "You said you wanted redemption." "I did." "Then why this?" Anna looked away, eyes dim. "You don't understand. Michael wasn't the end. He was just the beginning. There are others. Always were. He was just one voice in a larger choir. You're helping them? I'm surviving." Sarah's voice dropped. "People are dying, Anna." "And people will keep dying," Anna whispered, "because the ones who build sanctuaries always know how to hide. They trade faces. They move quietly. You stopped one. But there are more." Sarah stepped closer. "Where is Lydia?" Anna smiled sadly. "Not far. But not alone." It was enough. Sarah called in backup, secured the area, and turned Anna over to federal custody. She knew this would stretch beyond Pine Hollow now, interstate, maybe international. The Sanctum Center was just another mask. The real structure, the real danger, was deeper, older, systemic. That night, Sarah returned home and sat again on her porch. The stars above her flickered cold and quiet. Rex lay at her feet, head resting against her boot. She looked out at the forest, its edge barely visible in the dark, and knew the truth. The world was not safe. Justice was never final. But it didn't need to be. It just needed someone who would keep showing up, who would keep digging, who would follow the next whisper, the next missing name, the next buried clue. There would always be another fight. And Sarah Collins, tired, steady, relentless, would always be ready to meet it. Some whispers fade with the wind, but some stay with you forever. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, like, subscribe, and share it with a fellow mystery lover. Goodbye and see you in the next tale.